Hello, welcome to Enlightning with my guest today, Erin Schnabel. I'm so excited to have you here. Will you take a moment, please, Erin, and tell me about yourself? Tell us all about you. Uh-oh, Erin, you're muted.
I know you told me
There
to
you
mute,
go.
and then I forgot that I was muted. No, good. This is already. Okay. So, I worked at IBM for 21 years, but now I'm at Red Hat. See, this way. I kind of
Ah,
quietly have my
is that
Red Hat
like
over there.
part of your employment contract that you have to have that in your
No, not that we have to have it. It's just they send it to us, and I find it funny when I'm on like team calls and stuff. Where do they hide their fedora in their office? Sometimes it's super obvious, and sometimes it's like tucked out of the way. So it's really fun.
Maybe you need to do like an elf on the shelf thing where it's a little different each time.
Yeah, I should move it around. Yeah, exactly. Hide it. So, oh God, I'm like, so after 21 years working, I still do all the tech nerd things. I haven't fallen into management. I haven't fallen into, I don't know. I still prefer coding over all other things, really. And lately, it's been interesting getting into Quarkus, getting into some other stuff. I'm Java champion and like weirdly a distinguished engineer now, which is amazing. But like, yay! I don't know.
Yay!
Cool and weird and amazing. I don't know.
What are some of the criteria to be a distinguished engineer?
It's one of those. This is one of those things you like have to mentor people with now, which I was mentoring before. But like, you start in your career when you're junior, right? When you're new to the field, which for me was like almost Stone Ages ago, and I can't remember. But like, you're focused on learning. You're focused on maybe a little domain, a little area, and you're just trying to make progress and learn things, right? And then you get to the next level, which is maybe you know a few components, or you know more of like an area more than just like the one thing. And then maybe you lead a team, or you lead a group of teams. So it's at the distinguished level, it's scope of influence, breadth of
got it.
impact, which is like, that's me? Really? What? I don't know.
Yes, you deserve it. Stand up tall. Do the power pose.
I know.
It is me. Yeah. We have some comments in chat. Hello, Whitney and Erin. Amazing description to start with. So already excited about learning about metrics. If anyone out there in chat, I'd love to hear about what your experience is with metrics so far. What do you already know, or what are you?
Yes, and I want to know that too. I want to know that too. And I will say we're going to talk a little bit. I don't want to spoil the thunder because I know I'm your transition through the light board. But like, I am not the expert on metrics, so we'll talk about all kinds of things. But like, I know Joni's here. Hi, Joni.
Hi, Joni.
So I expect that he will be correcting me when I'm wrong, or pointing out things that I forgot.
Joni was the guest on Enlightning a couple weeks ago talking about observability. So awesome to have you.
Justin's here. Yay!
Hello, Justin. So I want to talk briefly about how we met. I have a lovely mentor named Rick, and I was experiencing in my professional domain some pretty blatant sexism, actually. And so Rick, of course, can help as much as he can, but as a cis white man, he's like, you need to have a female badass mentor in your life, or a role model. So he immediately introduced you and I to each other, and we took to each other very easily. But I'm really grateful to have you in my life, and you are a really wonderful role model. So thank you for that.
Thank you. But yeah, no, so he was totally right.
Totally right.
Totally right.
And so we have a comment from Anbu, Spring Boot Actuator. So I think that's maybe the answer to our question with what experience do we have in metrics?
Experience, yeah. And that's a great, for people who know Java and that use Spring Boot, that's the easiest way to get metrics out of your app, for sure.
Excellent. So, and so I guess I want to ask you the question, like, what's it like to be a female in tech, a female badass in tech, trying to stay technical? That's something that I experienced already in my short career, being pulled into soft skills.
Yeah, that's hard. So
yeah,
I will say, firstly, I had some unfair advantages. My dad does not tolerate bullies.
Okay.
He has some really fun aphorisms. He worked in automotive, and so he, as a like an engineer, like the automotive industry has this interesting thing with different kinds of personas, and at the time, which was 1980s, right? Like old school. So like there were rules about like whether or not the engineers were allowed to touch the machines, or only the union workers were allowed to touch the machines. So, it was like there was this stratum of who was allowed to do what. And Dev is just like, no, dude, like what? And then you have these people from some of the other big car companies who would come in with like the suit and tie, try to like intimidate everybody and boss them around. And he'd just be like, what? No. So like he had fun things that he would say, like, if you don't like your boss, fire him and hire a new one. Like your boss has no power over you at all. If you don't like him, leave. Like you're never stuck, was his thing.
Yeah.
He wasn't trying to say be rude to your boss, but he was always like, you're never trapped, right? Like
don't have a scarcity mentality. Yeah.
Exactly. And what else would he, that was like the big one. And the other thing that he would say is there was like an implied thing, which is you must be awesome at your job. But the follow on is, if you're awesome at your job, the rules don't apply to you. Like if something is crap and doesn't make any sense, you probably don't have to do it, as long as you're doing like all the other things and are awesome. They're not going to get rid of you. And we've seen that over and over again. Like your high performers, the rules don't apply to them. The same.
Or because there's sometimes like rules come down that will prevent me from being a high performer. And I'm like, if I do that,
only
then
if
I'm
you
no
pay
longer
attention
to do my job. Yeah, exactly. If I do
so like that's the thing. Like I came into this industry, and when I was young, I was always, and I still am often the only woman in the room, or one of two or three, with this attitude that's like, who are you? Like, I don't care. You got no power over me, whatever. I mean, like, I realize as I'm getting older, like I am totally my dad's kid. It's scary awesome, because him as a 7-year-old is like, oh dear. I'm gonna have to watch my evolution as I get older, because whoa, it's gonna be crazy. But no, so like I can remember when I started, there was some, like, they were doing a bunch of maintenance in the office, and there were some young girls, women my age, that were working on that. And comments, oh my gosh, I was wearing business clothes to work. I'm like, you're not talking about me that way. I got no body under this. Nope, I'm out of burlap sack.
That's
you are not talking about me in that way. No. And it was bad, and I should have reported people, but I was new. And that's one of those things where it's like I had to weigh it, right? It's like alienating the team is not what I need to be doing to get started.
I can identify with that.
Yeah, but it was like I can't do that.
You, as an example, in your very loose relationship with rules, or you're very I need to see a rule and decide whether it's worth it, whether I'm going to follow it. Like it goes through a critical thinking process for you. That was for me. For me, getting into tech was also my first experience in corporate life altogether. So having you as that example was really wonderful for me.
Yeah.
So thank you. So what you kind of touched on before that I'm excited to hear more about is, how did you get into metrics? I'm going to move over behind the light board while you talk about this. And I'm also going to put into chat one of your GitHub repos for a monster combat.
So that's my URL. So my introduction into metrics was accidental entirely. Well, sort of. So I started working with and thinking about cloud native applications, microservices, application architectures, all of that stuff in like 2014, 2015, 2016, like that. And I always had on my list, like, metrics are important. Having an observable system is important, as observability evolved as a, concept and a buzzword and a thing that we talk about, right? It was like metrics in my head was always something that was more interesting than most people seem to give it credit for. Like it was always when people talk about metrics, they always talk about it just in the SRE context. And I was like, there's more you can do with them, but I never actually got there. And so I do conference-driven development often. And
I'm doing that right now. I'm familiar.
Exactly, because it makes me do the thing. So I submitted a talk for Spring 1 in 2019 to use metrics to do, to help understand my application. And that forced me, like the whole intent was I will actually use the thing and Prometheus and Grafana and the dashboards. Like I will do the thing, darn it. And it coincided with my telling my son I would be a DM for him and his friends if he wanted to try that, because they were 10 at the time, and I wanted them not to lose.
Who aren't privy, that's a dungeon master, yes?
Yeah, it is a dungeon master for Dungeons and Dragons, and I wanted my son and his friends not to lose the power of imagination.
Oh,
peer pressure stuff, right?
That's great.
So it's like here they're 10 and they want to go do this thing. Like you can see on my shelf, like I went a little nuts. I've got like 50 million Dungeons and Dragons books now. It kind of took over my life, but I decided I needed to learn combat rules. So that ended up being an application that took Dungeons and Dragons monsters and made them fight each other.
Amazing.
And so then I was using custom metrics to understand what was happening then with those fights. So I wasn't just looking at HTTP throughput, which is like the most popular cited example. I was looking at how these fights were going, what the outcome was, how many attacks there were, how many rounds there were, what the average damage was, what type of damage there was. So I could really play with how these data types actually work, how the aggregation actually works, and to get a much better feel for how how metrics actually function. And as it happened, like some follow-on work, I discovered some problems with some other specs because they had never done anything beyond, look, it's a chart with HTTP throughput on it. So the fact they were doing bad math wasn't apparent because they never did anything off the beaten path.
Am I frozen for you?
Yes.
Do your kids like to code? Do they appreciate that you're making super cool apps for them?
No, they don't. But Eric is, well, they do, but they don't. So Eric is 13 now, and my daughter Caitlin is only 9. But Eric is coding, he just doesn't know it because he really likes Minecraft. Really likes Redstone. So he's basically doing logic gates. He just doesn't know that that's what he's doing. He's just making things that do stuff, and so he just doesn't. He hasn't figured it out yet that he's doing these other things. I've tried to teach him coding a couple of times, and it's like I don't think he's found the thing he wants to do with it yet. Is the thing, right? Like coding for coding doesn't work for me. And I think their brains are somewhat like mine. Like if they have a thing they want to do, but if they don't have a thing they want to do, then they won't.
So we've spoken at 2 conferences together lately. And for the first one, your daughter was texting you a ton the whole time.
It was the best. That was the best.
And then the second one, the audio, the visuals for it just totally, like fritzed. You're just fritzed. So right now my thing is fritzing. And I think basically this is an elaborate way to say I think it's your fault. That you're jinxed.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, I've already told you I don't think I can do that talk again because the third time it's going to blow up. Like something will catch fire. That's the progression curve I think it's on. So I will have to.
So I do want to say I want to acknowledge some chat real quick. Wait, does this? Yeah. So code with Sean, and then I'm gonna. Do you know what? And then I'm going to take a second and restart my computer. So you're gonna have to do some solo. Do you have a?
I can do solo. I mean, like it'll be weird, but I can do it.
So code with Sean. It's so good to see you again, code with Sean. It's been a while. So they think they saw direct message when they heard DM. Nick the first one is here. Hello, Nick the first one. How are you all today? So good. Sella Boy's here. Hi, Erin Whitney. That's a great example of business metrics in contrast to infrastructure metrics.
Yeah, that's part of what I wanted to talk about today too. because most of what when the tagline of the show and everything was more about application metrics, but most of the time when people talk about metrics, they're always talking about infrastructure metrics. And there's so many other ways sometimes to gather those metrics, and then where you get them from and how they overlap is a super fascinating question.
I want to hop away and troubleshoot. I'll be right back.
Yeah, do the thing. So everybody type at me so that I have a conversation with not myself. That's funner. So if you guys want to look at that GitHub repo, because I know it isn't up in the chat, you guys could try it out, I guess. But that does pull in all of the SRD monsters. So there's like 500 of them, I think. And the idea was that I would have some number of monsters between 2 and I think 6 fighting each other, and I can't. So it's, if somebody could share it again, that would be amazing, because I can't. I don't have the power of typing. Okay. So what products do you recommend for gathering metrics and analytics on them? And this varies quite a bit. So in the Java space, right, as an abstraction layer, I do really like Micrometer quite a bit, because it'll let me do timers. It'll let me do any other kind of sampling. And then I can send it to Prometheus and Grafana, or I can send it to any of the other backends that my business, my bigger, broader team might want to do. Are you back? Yay!
Woo! That wasn't too bad.
To finish Kogoston's question, I don't have a strong preference for one product over another in terms of where you might send your metrics, or how you might perform your analytics. My big thing is just keep in mind, like, you get the best information when you can aggregate things across many sources. That's how you start harvesting information. So this leads back a little bit to Joni's, some of the stuff that Joni was talking about, where companies like Honeycomb, for example, whether or not their product is the right one, their messaging, I think, is sound, which is they're trying to say, like, if you have all of the information together, you can really start harvesting information out of it. You can start asking interesting questions, and getting that back. So, or, being able to infer and learn new things about how your application is actually behaving, when you use something that gathers your information across multiple places. But then there's like a storage question. So some of what I've seen is, for metrics, for example, a small team would have a Prometheus dashboard with Grafana for their alerts, but they're still taking those metrics and sending them off somewhere centralized that people can do other processing with them. And OpenTelemetry is big for that right now, where you're looking at collectors and stuff that can filter and propagate and reroute so that you can get them the big global view for processing later, and then maybe a local view so that the team can orient. And that way you can get localized meaning for the team, and then bigger meaning for broader SRE concerns or entire application performance concerns. What I don't know how to show, but I know is important, it is how to get your front end teams, because they have analytics for how people are actually using the website. Like, that's your Google Analytics stuff, right? How to get some of that information propagated down into your other things, so that what the front end is doing can be correlated with these other metrics too. Because then you start getting really interesting business, understanding how your business is working and understanding which parts of your app are interesting and useful and which ones are not, which can help you understand what you should be doing.
Can I just say how much I love how little I'm needed right now, or how much you take care of each other, and what a great conversation you're having. And I'm touched. I think it's lovely. And I'll give some shout outs to some comments quickly. He said the show should run every week instead of every other week. It actually runs every week that I'm home and not traveling on tour. So it ran last week, and it'll be next week. So we got 3 weeks in a row, and then it'll be a break while I'm gone. So it's a little irregular, but I do try to keep this Thursday time slot. But thank you for the encouragement. I'm glad that you want me around. I appreciate that. And again, what does this acronym GTSY mean? I feel like the show is half just me asking what acronyms are. And then welcome back. Yay. And then lots of lovely comments. Thank you, everyone. And I think we're ready to dig in.
Good to
see you. Nice. Thank you.
It didn't resolve for me either. I'm like, what does that mean?
Oh, we got a comment from Salaboy. I wonder if it shouldn't go the other way around, sending back an info to Google Analytics to have the complete business view over there. That's an interesting point.
That could happen. I could see that you might take, I don't know, some future collector and pull out, like, that's a totally valid thing. I like I said, I don't know the right way to do it, right? I just know that to get a whole picture, some subset of the metrics that you're gathering, getting them all together could be really useful. I don't know the best way to do that, honestly.
And I will say, Nick says the stream should be every day. I don't know. I feel so much adrenaline and emotions around having a stream still. So I don't know if I could just handle that emotionally. And then Code with Sean, I'll send you a DM about being a DM.
Absolutely.
Haha, we don't understand each other's acronyms. It goes two ways.
Exactly.
I guess one question I have, I know observability is about measuring like every single output you can get your hands on to try to get a picture of the internals of your system. What's metrics exactly then? How does metrics relate?
Okay, so if we recap a little bit where we ended up with Joni's talk, right? And I actually, I've had a couple of talks that were interesting that tried to say, like, let's stop thinking about observability as an ility. I mean, it is. But what it means is we want our system, whether it's one big monolith or like some distributed fleet of things across data centers in the world, right, to be observable. Okay, so then what do you need to have the service be observable? And this is what, Joni talked about the pillars. He and I kind of agree. Yes, your health checks count as part of your system being observable, especially to automated agents, right? That's part of making sure your system can be observed. Metrics are a very concise, not small, but concise storage format, because your every measurement is down to a number. Some combination of things, a number. So you're down to a number. And you're further, if we think about how these things are oriented, your numbers, it's a time series, right? So any graph for metrics, unless you do some aggregate views, which you can do, any metrics graph, dashboard, whatever, the x-axis is time.
Okay.
So every measurement, right, you're just plotting on in time. So you always have charts against time. Time is your x. Time is always your x. And then your y will vary, right? So the question is, a long time ago, I told you my dad worked in automotive, right? So I spent when I was a computer science student, I spent 2 summers doing quality control in an automotive manufacturing plant, because it's totally relevant to your job. Who knew that it actually would be like young me knew more than current me does. But so the thing with like quality control in a manufacturing plant, if you think about this, it does pertain, I swear, is when you're in the quality control office measuring parts off a manufacturing line, you're measuring at like a couple parts from every lot, every bin of parts, right? And the idea is you're doing these measurements consistently, and the tools that are being used to manufacture these parts. My dad worked at a stamping plant. So they, stamp the parts, put them together, and, you had drills and all kinds of things. And the drill bits, the tools would wear. So then the question is, when do you have to replace the tool? You don't ever, so they were like a 3rd-tier supplier. So the parts that they would make had to go to another plant that would assemble a sub-assembly that would then go into the car. You don't want to ship bad parts upstream. You don't want to ship bad parts to the next thing. So you have to know when you have to change the tool before you're producing bad parts. So how do you figure that out? You have to be able to observe what your, what is being produced. So the issue is you sample parts from every lot. It's like 2 parts out of every X. I don't remember how many. And you watch the measurements, and when it reaches a threshold, you replace the tool. And then you're back right? And you watch the measurements and we just sit there. Does that sound familiar? Yes, that's exactly what we're doing with metrics in this other system. We're using these, the whole point with metrics is you're capturing these measurements at a fixed period, ideally, a very consistent fixed period. So you have measurements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that way you have a baseline. And sometimes that baseline, like you can get data that's total garbage. You know, like this baseline is not telling me anything useful because it's all over the map. Like there's nothing useful I can infer out of this. And in which case, why do you measure that? You know, maybe it's not useful. But the whole idea is that because you're measuring things regularly, you get an idea of what normal looks like because you have this nice pattern, which helps you spot anomalies when things are not normal. And when things are not normal, that's your canary. That's your indication. Something is wrong and I need to go I need to go figure out more. But your metrics are not going to tell you what more is. Right? They're not going to tell you the detail of what's broken. They will just tell you that something is broken or misbehaving. Right? So that's and that works across infrastructure concerns and business concerns. We have also with metrics, there's lots of different words. So if you go search for application metrics, oh man, you don't always get the right thing. So I think we have a question about, is it a data vault? And this is one of the things, metrics gets overused. So the case that I'm using it, the case that we're using it in, which is a follow on from Joni's conversation, right, is metrics in the sense of observing the behavior of a distributed system. There's also metrics which are key performance indicators and KPIs and goal setting and those kinds of metrics. You also have metrics coming from front end analytics on websites. Those are also metrics. Those metrics also come down, basically, they still come down into numbers, but how they're stored and aggregated and how you view them is often a little different. You will see metrics sometimes applied to, where was I? I was just seeing it the other day. There's some data science applications of metrics also that are similar. You can take some of your data science practices and apply them to observability concerns because how you're manipulating your values or like some of the math maps, but some of the meanings don't, or what you're looking for doesn't. Right? So yeah, it's if you just look for metrics, it can be seriously overused, which does not help your understanding of the topic. But within this context, if we're thinking about the observability of a distributed system or how your application behaves within a distributed system or how your application, some of what I was doing with my Monster Combat application, right? I was using numbers, these measurements, we can talk about what measurements look like and how we disambiguate them and aggregate them, right? But I was using those numbers to understand the behavior of, in my case, monsters, but that was ultimately the business logic inside my back end application. Was it doing what I wanted it to do? Because in theory, I could have, if you just look at throughput across your system, or you just look at from the infrastructure level, HTTP flows, I could be returning 200 OK responses all day, but could have skipped an important code path. So everything looks healthy. Okay. It's not. So
I wanna say hi to Feel Schnabel. Hi, Feel Schnabel, welcome. Glad you're here. And I guess I'm just kind of picking out some things that you say and write them down. I want to make sure I'm capturing the big picture of what you need and I'm not missing anything. So the bottom line is metrics are measurements over time. It all comes down to, in the end, metrics are numbers. So numbers and time to understand behavior.
Yes.
So this is measuring at a regular time interval is important. So you need to define normal, and that's how you're going to be able to spot anomalies. And then maybe this part isn't important, but metrics can mean a lot of things.
It can. And if you go look at it, yeah, it can mean a lot of things.
And then today, are we focusing on how metrics can be about system performance, or are we going to talk about all the dimensions?
We're going to look mostly at system performance is tough because people think performance and they think a different thing.
Okay. Behavior,
but let's
behavior?
say behavior. Yeah, behavior is better, right? Yeah, because we're in this observability construct, right? So behavior is better. So we did have a question about metrics, and is it a data vault? Data vaults or data lakes is definitely that's in the data science space. What we're talking about in this context is time series databases, where time series databases are deliberately built to store this sequential number, these sequential values, and how they store them and what they store does vary database to database. But InnoDB is one that I know of. Prometheus has one. I think Thanos has another one that's name I forget. But they are oriented around storing these numbers. So what we should talk about, and what's interesting in the application space that helps us infer meaning and be able to drill things down, is the notion of using tags or labels to annotate the measurements that we have, and what that does, like how that impacts the number of time series that you have, right? So each measurement that we take is a data point in a time series. So then what happens is we decorate those measurements with labels. So we might say, if we go with an HTTP request, we might say that an HTTP request duration, we're going to keep it simple, right? That the HTTP request duration is 0.2 milliseconds. Right? But there's some things, some ways we can decorate that. And we could say, if the request was for a particular URI, it was for /hello, versus the other one, which is for /goodbye. But so that makes 2 data points. That means every time I measure for a hello, a hit to a hello, versus every time I measure for a hit to a goodbye, I have then options, right? So it makes 2 time series, but I can aggregate across those 2 dimensions. So I can see all HTTP requests. So I can start looking at the average or the max, or just the value over the last X seconds, right? I can start looking at how long my requests generally are taking, or I can focus, because of the way these tags work, on just how long the hello requests are taking, or on just how long the goodbye requests are taking. So that's why these labels start to bring you some power, right? Because they allow you to sort of drill down on some of this information. And Salaboy is on the nose. When I think about metrics, I think about collecting data so I can perform statistical analysis to understand anomalies. Yes, that's exactly what you're doing. When you think about how like what you want to measure, that helps understand what is interesting to measure in some ways, right? So in my silly example, my ridiculous monster combat application, I wanted to know how many rounds of combat does it usually take? 4? Is it 6? Like, I didn't know what the average was, right? And then like how what's an average damage? How often do crits happen? Like, I just wanted to understand like how this statistically worked. And it was cool. Like, it was really cool. And I could, to the cardinality concern, Erin Schnabel was like, sending tags dimensions with metrics, but keep the cardinality down. And that is what we're talking about here. So I've just told you I have a label for hello and goodbye, right? And then each one of those, when I use that, they make a new time series. I can aggregate those time series if I leave the label out, right? And treat them as one, or I can put the label back in and I can get 2, which is great. Okay, so what happens if I say, hello, username? And that's the ID. If I make every username, hello, Whitney, hello, Rick, hello, Salaboy, hello, whoa, you get unique time series, like, and potentially way too many. Hello, Rick. like way too many, right? And so what we usually do in that case is we find ways to abstract that part. So like the URI that we might use for that case is hello / and like a little curly brace username. Like this is where the username goes, but we're not doing that, right? We just know that that's what happened. And that way we constrain how many permutations of this metric we have. In the strict HTTP case, the kinds of things we tend to look for is like what the URI was, what the return code was. So we can see 200s versus 400s versus 500s, where 500s are server errors that we're having problems with. 400s is user errors. Those also we tend to generify a lot. 500s, 400s, we tend to get that status code in there, the URI in there. In the case of Spring, they did something that I preserved when I moved the micrometer stuff into Quarkus. It's not universally done, but John's reasons for doing so were good. He grouped, he has a success attribute that's on there, which is a further reduction of 200s into a success, 400s into a client error, and all the 500s into a server error. Because what he found was that when people were making their dashboards, they would forget a code. They would want to aggregate and see all the errors. Like they would want to see all the server side errors, but they would forget a 503 or something. Like they would leave one out. And he was like, it was too error prone. So he created outcomes, is the field it is, to allow you to group so that you can make a dashboard that shows the number of requests that were successful versus the number that failed. And that leads into some other interesting insights that you can get into.
We have a question real quick before you move on. What is the difference? What are the differences between numeric time series metrics versus data for billing metrics?
Oh man, they're not necessarily different if you think about it. How they might be gathered and who is gathering them and where they go might be different. But like I could easily set up, and again, I told you, like this isn't Java specific. Java is just what I know. So if I had one service, let's say I had a service that was like an FTP transfer service. I don't know why, because that's what comes to my head right now. And I said, well, I will have this service, but I'm going to have to pay my cloud provider for whatever number of bytes that I do. So I need to know how many bytes I'm transferring so that I can bill you properly, right? I can use distribution summaries in Micrometer if I wanted to do it within the context of my application, so I can scope it to your account, right? I can grab that information in a metric. Now, the trick is, like I just said, so I could scope it to your account. That might be dangerous because depending on how many accounts I have, that could be a lot of metrics, like we just said with Cardinality. But I can still, so when you're usually doing the kinds of information you want for billing, the issue again is that cardinality, because you want to realign things on a different axes, so to speak, and it's not going to go off into your Prometheus data store so you can look for canary results. Like the purpose, the usage is different, but I could take those measurements maybe and route them to a different registry. And I could take the same, like with Micrometer, I can use backend meter filters to say, I want this metric to go to Prometheus, and I'm going to reduce that. I'm going to strip the account off, the account label off, so Prometheus is happy and is not getting flooded with that high cardinality data. But I could take that same measurement of bytes sent, bytes written, bytes read, like those two metrics, because those are important to my business, and I could keep the account information and then route them over there. So it's the purpose is different, I think, but the general concepts are very similar, right? It's just how much data you're dealing with. And yeah, Salaboy is for most developers, the statistical part. Amen. Like my brain does not like statistics, so I have to learn it and then do things, and then I forget. And then if I have to do it again, I have to reteach myself all the things, because my brain just is like, oh, you don't need that. I don't know if that happens to anybody else, but it's yeah, and aggregating data based on time is really hard. And further, it's really easy to get yourself into invalid math.
Yeah.
Especially if you have done anything in your past life with like typical old school application performance management or monitoring. Because those tend to focus, if you came from a monolithic, the big monoliths of our past, which are still totally valid and sometimes work great. So we shouldn't be just, uniformly throwing them under the bus. But if you were, the metrics in those days were focused on the behavior of a single instance of a thing. And if you had trouble with it, you tuned that single instance of a thing. You didn't go with the, I need more capacity, let me just create 12 more or whatever. So aggregation in that case wasn't really important. So having an agent or something that's collecting metrics, doing all of the math, like all the way down to like statistical standard deviations and quantiles and stuff, within that single instance was fine. It wasn't an issue. But the problem is, if I take a standard deviation, statistics, blah. If I calculate the standard deviation, that's based on the distribution of measurements for that single instance. Okay, so if I have another instance, that instance has a different distribution of metrics, which means that standard deviation is different. Those two standard deviations do not relate to each other. They're very lossy, and I can't do anything with them other than watch them both. Like if I wanted to watch them both separately as data points in a graph and not try to combine them, that would be fine. But I can't meaningfully combine those at all. And that's a hard, it's something like it's too super easy to trip over, is that you've gone and done, put yourself into inaggregable math. Inaggregable, I'm sure is not a word, but it's okay. I think you know what I meant.
So what I'm hearing is it used to be focused on a single instance, and now with distributed applications and microservices, we're having to consider lots of different instances.
Yeah, because what we're trying to do is scale with many instances, which means we need to be able to aggregate across those instances.
So are there tools then that have cropped up to help solve this problem, or are people getting really good at math to solve this problem? Like,
so the tags and everything are relevant to that, right? So within my Monster Combat application, if people want to run that, or they can make a JavaScript version and throw it into my repo so we can mix them all together and prove the point. It's fine. So the Monster Combat repo that I have, it is Java based because I'm a Java head. It is what it is. It has both Quarkus and Spring applications in it, and they run in JVM mode and in native mode. Right. So I have, I think out of the box at the moment, if you start it up, I have 5 processes that are running. They're all basically doing the same thing, and they're all using micrometer, and they're all emitting the same named measurements, attacks per round, encounters per round. Like the name of the metric is the same. The tags vary. What type of damage was it? How many? Like what dice roll? I have a thing with dice rolls with like what was rolled. The type of damage, the type of attack. Like I've got a couple labels, right, that apply. But one of the labels that gets applied by default is one that indicates which process it was from. So I can use those labels, those dimensions. I can see how did my Quarkus native application behave. I can filter down to just those. Or I could filter down to just the Spring one. Or I can ignore that and instead focus on one of the other dimensions. So I can look at how all attacks based on a save DC behaved versus all attacks that were against an AC, which you don't have to know what that means. It's armor class, ace in that case, right? So it's my random, example.
We're D&D.
Exactly. But the point is that because I have these labels, the focus for Prometheus and for other things is on being able to have these numbers that you can aggregate across these instances so that you can understand holistically how your application is behaving.
So the labels in this case, to solve this particular problem, you would want labels that show you instances of your application that distinguish instances from each other, but then you
most
can
of the time
get rid
you
of them to
have
see
them,
holistic.
and then you can just
Okay.
you can use them or not, depending on what it is that you're looking at. So having the labels per instance is really useful.
Okay.
Right? It allows you to focus on an instance if you think one instance is having problems, or you can aggregate across them and see how the whole pattern is.
I have a question about that then. Like in a distributed application that scales to hundreds or thousands of pods, aren't you getting into the cardinality problem?
Yes and no. Because let's think about the tags that we might have if we go back to that HTTP request example that we used before, right? So I still don't have that many tags. Cardinality is not, cardinality alone is not a problem. You can deal with fairly high cardinality. You just don't want infinite cardinality.
Okay. All right.
So like if I'm looking at my application instance, we're just gonna say it's my Monster Combat application. If I have 12 instances of my Monster Combat application running in different places, it's still the same application. The URIs are going to overlap. The error codes, like the status codes, will overlap. That outcome will overlap. So they're not creating infinite in that case, but I will have a different time series for each process. So yeah, I mean, you do start getting, this is why it explodes, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah, I can see that.
They say cardinality explosion, and that's why. I might have 5 if I'm only looking at 1, but then it's 5 times 12 if I have 12 of them, because each of those is different. Tony says, dealing with high cardinality data is like trying to store infinite data in non-infinite space. And yeah, that's true. I just think that you can probably deal with more than you think, right? Like, don't be afraid of getting, like, if the meaning that you need out of that data is, you just don't want, like, if you're gonna get meaning out of it, go for it. You just don't want infinite.
It's just like anything, it's a cost benefit ratio, right?
Yeah,
we have some comments,
and you'll also find, just one thing, you'll also find with some of the tag combinations that, like, I had some ideas for, like, tracking, doesn't matter what exactly they are, but there were some attributes, some Dungeons and Dragons attributes, like, I think I'll use those, and it produced epically, like, crazy amounts of data, but it was so sparse, it wasn't useful. So it's like, why am I even okay? Like, there's not enough data here for me to meaningfully use this tag. So it's like, why am I doing that? So I just dropped it, because it's like, this isn't telling me anything anyway. So you want enough, like, useful fields will occur often enough that you'll get a reasonable baseline. If it's so rare that you don't get a good baseline, you should maybe not bother gathering it.
So we have a chat that's blowing up, so let's give it some love.
Yeah.
Solid Boy says, yeah, with multi-replica scenario, it's when you can find cases where replicas are misbehaving, but the entire app is working fine from a performance perspective and from a business perspective.
Exactly. So that's why you want those tags. So you can say, oh, okay, wait, there is an anomaly, but if I start isolating, okay, it's just this one that's all screwed up. Everybody else is okay. And so that's why being able to slice and dice using these tags is just super powerful.
Absolutely. And then Fuel Schnabel is asking, pull-based or push-based metrics? Does pull work well with AWS Lambdas and similar things?
Different metrics backends work differently. Prometheus requires, most of the time, it really wants to do pull-based metrics, but pull-based metrics do not work with Lambdas, because your function that's functional, like functions running in a Kubernetes based, because by the time the next pull scrape interval happens, the thing will be gone. So, like, okay, Joni, tell me what it's called. Like, Prometheus has a pull exporter that I can't remember the name of, but the general gist is it has a thing where the function that can push its metrics into that thing, which is what will get scraped. So it gives that intermediate where I can push on my way out, right? I'm the function, I'm done, I'm going to push what happened, and it goes into it goes into a place, and then Prometheus generally can just scrape that thing that doesn't go away.
Interesting.
And that's how you adapt between them.
I love having
push gateway. Joni says push gateway. That's the one. Yeah, it's called push gateway. Thank you.
I love having Fuel Schnabel in the chat because he always gives us like a real world example of something worst case usually. Yeah. And so Fuel Schnabel says we got shut down by the metrics provider for sending a tag with too high cardinality. In other cases, it cost $8,000 a month for a metric that no one looked at.
Right. And that was what, like, so that was what I started figuring out when I was just playing with my stupid monster combat application. That was when I started to realize, like, this one has super high cardinality and the data is too sparse to be useful. So it's like, you're not giving me any value. I'm not getting any meaning of it. I'm going to just toss it.
And so the problem in Fuel Schnabel's case is that the metric API allowed for cardinality explosion without the dev realizing it.
That's true. So even and I think Joni has one a little up. That's shameless plug. The next version of Micrometer will contain a high cardinality tags detector. Fingers crossed. There is already a way to do that, but you have to set it up. So like I have, and I know Spring also has a limiter on URI tags because it's too common for people to forget to map a tag. So we'll send 100 max and then say, whoops, like this is going to blow yourself out of the water. This tag is going too high. And I think both Spring and Quarkus have a way for you to set the limit on what that cardinality is. So you could say, no, actually I want 1,000 of these, thanks, because that's the max and I just want them all. So you can override our judgment, but I actually totally agree with Fuel with the heat, like they should never assume men. So hard not to, but I should never assume because I'm here and I'm not. But the tags are what make metrics so useful. But the sticky wicket is you need to pay attention to what is aggregable, what numbers make sense to aggregate. You can't and what kind of purpose you're trying to apply these metrics towards.
And so, what Fuel Schnabel is concerned with currently is that 1 month we have a huge bill, we're forced to get rid of the metrics. So if it happens again at his particular company, it sounds like he'll lose his access to metrics altogether.
Yeah, so there's interesting things that it would be interesting to, Joni, maybe we could play with this in either Micrometer or in the OTel space, either one. But this is where like a kind of dynamic sampling would be interesting. The general gist would be like in HTTP 200, an okay response. It's not particularly interesting. Like, it's interesting, but it's not, it's not super interesting because theoretically that's what should be happening all the time. And you might want to know about how long those are taking, but I don't know, you don't need to know that many. So you could probably condense those within the client and only send fewer, however you want to do that. But then what the ones you really want to know in terms of anomaly detection, right, is like how many errors are you getting? How long are those taking? And those are already rarer numbers.
So is sample
he's saying, he's like, I capture more tags on error responses.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's when you start getting more information. Like if I'm having an error that's taking longer, is that more interesting? Do you need to actually capture all of your 200 responses that are normal? Like maybe 1 in 10, 1 in 20, I don't know.
So sample rate is something you're considering when you're deciding what to measure in your system.
You can. Yeah, it's some of this also might be a case for where tracing might be better than metrics and you might suppress some of the metrics. There's a couple different strategies to reduce the amount of stuff you're emitting.
Jump over to tracing or so the metrics for distributed apps problem is adding labels per instance. Is that just the solution? It's that easy, or is there more to it than that?
Most of the time, if you're like using any Prometheus library, any open telemetry library with the metrics API, that will magically be done for you. In a lot of cases, or the Prometheus. If you're using Prometheus and Prometheus is doing the scrape, it will add a job ID. Like a lot of that stuff does get added for you based on the library. Double check, but And if Spring adds, I don't think I add an app name in Quarkus. Maybe I do. But Prometheus is often scraping. It will add things on the scrape about who it scraped it from. So some of it, it's like, I don't know, do I need to add stuff that I know the system is gonna, the infrastructure probably knows better than me and will add stuff anyway. Like, why do I have to do it? I don't do it at the app level.
And Andu wants to say Prometheus will pull, but a gateway will push.
Yeah, that's the Prometheus has a push gateway. That was the name of the thing that sits there so that you can bridge for short-lived things like functions that will be gone before the next scrape interval.
Excellent.
And yes, to feel what Schnabel is saying now, right? The very last one. And that is the advantage, right? When you're looking at logs or context-rich traces, sometimes you do have a risk because they will contain customer information that might be sensitive, or logs, because you're in the middle of your code and you might be omitting stuff, and you know, it's just, there's more risk there. But you almost never have that in your metrics.
So metrics versus logs, metrics are easier to keep around than logs.
Yeah. You could also, there are metrics compression algorithms too, in the same vein. Like, I'm going to take a certain time period of all these 200 requests and I'm going to condense them down into an average, because, you know, and then you can condense your data and keep stuff that's more interesting. It can start to change your view, but
I'm having a little trouble today. We're like all over the place, which is really exciting, and I kind of love just following the thread and where the chat takes us and stuff, but also I'm not confident that I'm capturing the most important information either. Like, are there things that we've talked about, like we touched on tracing and logs briefly, that I should capture here?
So,
or leave room for later?
If you want to put up in the corner, right, the reference into the observability stuff that we talked about with Joni last week. Metrics is one piece of the observability pie, right?
Okay.
So we have logs that have all of your implementation specific context data. Here's where I was in the app when this happened, and I've got my logs, my log information that records what exactly was happening. Traces have span information that help you chain across, like they help you connect the context as you flow through many pieces, many, you know, all the services in a function, right? So they have different information. And so the traces are that connective tissue that helps you see between things. And when you were talking about distributed systems, that's really important, because very frequently your problem is in the space between. Not necessarily one service or the other, it's something between that happened.
So Joni went over this. Joni and Erin helped me remember the metrics, logs, and traces, how they relate to each other. Will you repeat that a little bit? The metrics are the measurements over time.
They're numbers. They're not exactly over time of numbers. That's right. And your logs are like the super chatty novel of everything that happened from an instant level. The journal, like it's you know, it's the diary of an app. This is what happened on my day. This method, when this method was called, right? This is exactly what happened.
Okay.
And then the traces are like the historian overview of what happened in between all these things. We want to take it into human land, because personifying our computer systems is what is right?
My feelings today, dear diary.
Dear diary, that's right. Now I think I want, I'm kidding. Don't do that in your logs. That'd be a bad plan.
Error codes. Yeah, I journal every day. I'm not dissing. Oh yeah, what happens? Thank you, Joni.
Yeah.
What happens? What is the context, and why did it happen? So logs are the context?
Logs are the local context. Like, logs are the super detailed, relevant to that particular piece.
And then the traces will help you figure out why.
Yeah, why in the big picture. Logs and traces will kind of both help you figure out why, depending on where the why is. If you're right, so like logs will show you a why when it's inside of a specific service. Traces will help you show the why if it's an in-between services kind of problem. It'll help you find when there's latency or sometimes DNS problems or that kind of thing if it's not in a service, if it's in a space between.
Okay.
Yeah, Findall has a good description too.
Findall.
Right?
Metrics,
is something
going wrong. Traces, where is it going wrong? Logs, why is it going wrong? I like it.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it. And again, like the metrics, because they're down to that number, as long as you don't have a cardinality explosion, it is a much denser information storage format. Because you're just storing numbers ultimately. It's just how many numbers.
Nice. Excellent.
Yeah.
So is it worthwhile maybe to talk more directly about like metrics versus logs and metrics versus traces? Like because we kind of have been touching on that in the conversation.
Yeah, we can. I mean, the general gist again, and we did sort of start there, right? Is metrics are your baseline. It's anomaly detection. It's pattern matching. It's all statistical analysis, right? So what is normal? Or understanding what normal is in my case with my ridiculous app that I had no idea what the heck normal even was. What is normal? What am I doing? And then once you know what normal is, then you can start spotting when things are no longer normal. And the challenge is, and this varies per application, per business, right? What is relevant to my app? How do I know that my app is doing what it's supposed to do? It's supposed to bring it's supposed to do something nice for my business. How do I know that it's not just returning because somebody commented code out? How do I know it's actually doing the thing it's supposed to be doing? It's actually checking out a shopping cart. It's not just a 200 response. Because you could get a 200 response with a bug.
So we're talking about you should measure and you should decorate your measurements with labels. But should we be more specific maybe about like what you should be measuring? Are there like best practices regardless of app, or is it all going to be app specific?
There are some things that will be kind of universally gathered. And at this point, a lot of frameworks will do that for you. So if you use a micrometer, if you use open telemetry, if you use, I don't know as much people in the chat who have their favorite libraries not in Java, chip in what your favorite is. Open telemetry, I know, has instrumentation across a lot of languages, which is why I mention it. But those teams are starting to provide instrumentation kind of out of the box for common libraries that are in use. And that just helps because you don't have to think about it so much, right? You turn on micrometer in Quarkus or in Spring and you get the common HTTP metrics. You don't have to know what they are, they just happen, which is the best, right? And there are ways in both runtimes, and I think with most of these other ones too, to turn them off if you don't need them, or if you find that they're too much, you can tone it down or group them or put limits in place. But the defaults for general like HTTP behavior or whatever, those are fairly easy to get for free without thinking about it too hard, which is better, especially as open telemetry starts working towards semantic conventions. The less you try to do it by hand, the better, right? Because you're more likely to align with semantic conventions, and those are starting to go across languages, and all that stuff is great.
Okay, we got Saliboy. One important aspect of metrics that are not technical is that they will contain a lot of important business data, the number of orders processed, customer delays, etc. Is that maybe related to like metrics can mean many things, like maybe the KPIs or that how it's used?
Sort of. So like if I'm working on the shopping cart application, right? If I'm doing the shopping cart application, I can increment a counter every time a shopping cart is checked out. So that helps with like how many transactions were closed because somebody actually checked out. I could probably count every time somebody, like every time a shopping cart, how the frick would I do? I've never written a shopping cart that timed out. Like, but Amazon definitely knows when I left my shopping cart sitting there with stuff in it, or Target does, because they'll come email me. But that kind of thing, like you can collect that as the app does things. Oh, this session ended, but their cart was still full. I can count that. Right. So that kind of stuff can then feed into these other metrics, which if you are making a service that's one piece of a bigger puzzle, it probably does have key things it's trying to do. Those are your key performance indicators. How do you know that your service is doing what it's supposed to be doing within that greater context? And that's part of what you should be measuring. But like some of the things, like he's talking about funnel, he's mentioning funnel metrics and stuff. And some of those also come from the front end analytics, how the front end analytics, how people are interacting with UI elements and that kind of thing. They should all kind of go together. This is why I'm saying, like, I don't necessarily know, because I think it is somewhat unique. Like, I know it would be good to correlate how often people are having trouble with the front end. Maybe something's not responsive. We can see that happens in the back end. We can go chase why, because there's some continuity in how metrics at the front end are labeled, so that we can help find like the associated back end, and we can correlate between them. Because the most important thing usually is how the users are interacting with the system, and then you chase down into the back a little bit. Metrics is where you get your statistical bragging rights. Maybe X logins per second. Yes, some of those logins per second, though, those don't necessarily come from, depends on how, who's counting, how it's being counted. You can do those either from front-end analytics, or you could do it from back-end measurements, or both. Yeah.
Or less braggy says, then we're crashing 5 times per second in that microservice. It goes both ways.
Yeah. And yeah, to Joni's point, data points can be dropped if you need your business data 100% accurate, right? Metrics libraries are not a good choice for important business analytics. And I would agree with that. If you have audit requirements, and like you don't want to use a metrics library for that, you want to use something that's got guaranteed delivery kind of thing, right? Metrics is you want the regular cadence with metrics, but fundamentally it's lossy, or it has a potential to be lost. And it's not an urgent, the world is ending if a scrape fails, or if if some handshake fails and you miss some metrics, because these are just canary in the coal mine kind of things, right? You don't want that to bring your whole system down. These are somewhat ancillary to functioning, I guess.
A challenge at work, Fuel Schnabel says, is how to get front end to send metrics. The issue is if we have secrets on the front end, and some abuser can intercept it and generate high cardinality metrics.
Yeah, for real. I think this is where some of the front end metrics libraries have the advantage, and then because they're built for collecting things from the front end.
Are these front end libraries?
No, most of what I've been talking about is in the back end.
Okay.
It's in Java processes or Node processes or Go processes. There's other libraries that are more directly aligned with what happens in the phone, what happens on the browser page, and where that goes. And some of those services are a little better suited. There's a couple that I can't think of the names right now because my brain just parse fail. Won't. Resolution failure, nope. But they can collect the information to the phone and then route it to the right, like they can make determinations about where it needs to go afterwards, right? Which would then help with the correlation problem. And it keeps the data that needs to be on the device or on a person's web browser separate from that back-end reporting tool that, again, that might be able to mitigate the high cardinality concern from a hacker, for example, because this service would be able to backstop that. I can't remember what the one I'm thinking of is called then.
Fuel Stable says Blazor server solves all of this with a winky face. So I think there's maybe something I don't understand.
There's another. Why was I looking at that? I think I was looking because Google Analytics is Joni says user input is potentially high cardinality also. So either don't include it or normalize it for real. And that's anywhere. Don't include user is just being cheeky. Fuel Schnabel says I'm just being cheeky. I think I was looking for alternatives to Google Analytics. Google Analytics is used super, super commonly.
Okay.
But it's Google, and Google's like, oh, but they're spying on you all the time. So maybe there's alternatives. And there were a couple that looked interesting that were able to do a little bit of this. Let me see what I'm gathering and then route them to other places. And I found that interesting because in my head, being able to have some unified view of what's happening on the front end and being able then to merge that with what's happening on the back end, so you get a more comprehensive view, is super interesting.
And
I have to go back now.
Yeah. What's a strategy for doing that?
I don't know. I haven't figured. I have to do a new application that's something else, where I have to do some fruity front end for my monsters or something. I don't know, so that I can actually get my hands on it and figure it all out. And my intuition says it's useful. I just haven't done it enough to actually map all the tags myself. So it depends on it is like that. How many shopping cart things is the front end seeing? And if they're seeing X number of shopping carts, is that getting down back into the back end? If they're seeing shopping cart failures, how is that mapping to what we're seeing in the back end? Where you're getting your signals from, how those are correlated.
Does anyone in the chat have experience with trying to correlate front end to back end metrics?
And then I've done a lot with analytics on another application that I have, but I was using them for a very different purpose. Ooh. So
do tell.
Well, so with that analytics, we were trying to trace. This is my other. Rick knows about this application if he's still here. So that was Game On, which was a super accurately named text-based adventure game for playing with microservices because that's really important. But in that case, what I was trying to look at is how often are people, so just within the front end, without thinking about what the back end services are, because in that front end case, it's a single page application. So it's running entirely, it is its own thing running in the phone, and it's not necessarily communicating with the back end on all things. So it's how far into the app are people getting before they drop? What are their most common navigation paths? What are the most interesting thing? But that doesn't have any back end implication to it necessarily, right? It's just looking at usage within the front end to try to understand what people are using. The numbers are in the end are kind of similar, but the analytics tools don't give you the same access to those numbers in some ways. They collect it a little differently.
We have a question from Fuel Stable. Can we talk visualization, dashboards, and alarms?
We can.
Oh my.
Yeah. I know, right? Visualization is hard. I should have given you a bunch of things I could, I don't know how to do this with you drawing. I should have given you a bunch of pictures we could stick up ahead of time and draw on.
Nice.
So the
it's gonna be like Pictionary.
Yeah. Draw this with and make a sheep shape and no. So my experience with visualization is interesting, and it'll be cool to see if anybody else has this experience. And of course, I was just messing around with numbers just for fun, right? So my application was not nearly as serious or real. But I found my back is now tired. I'm sitting down. I'm officially lazy. I found that it was easy for me it's too easy sometimes to both measure things that don't matter and graph things that don't make sense. Because they're just numbers and you feel like you could just jam everything onto the graph and then it'll tell you something useful. And you do have to be aware of what you're measuring, and how that should be visualized in a way that makes sense. Most of the time, like if you try to visualize a counter, if a counter is monotonically increasing, it's not particularly interesting, because it's like this triangle shape, and then something resets and then it's like a triangle shape, right? It's not telling you something. So usually what you're actually interested in is the rate of change of that counter. How much has this counter incremented in the last 15 seconds or over the last 15 seconds? So it's like you have your scrape interval that's checking the value of the counter, but what you actually end up plotting is the difference in that counter value within the scrape interval. I'm thinking in terms of Prometheus, right? I think New Relic and I don't know about Datadog, but there's a couple of them where the client, the library that's running in the client, it's literally only ever sending the delta values. Prometheus actually wants to see the raw counter value, and it calculates the delta on the other side, on the server side. So there are differences in how those values are transmitted. But
I want to confirm with you something you said at the beginning. The x-axis is always time. Is that? Yes. I'm going to write that down here.
Yes.
Cool.
Right? First derivative by time. Thank you, Joni. I am not a math person, but Joni says if you are a math person, the first derivative by time. Yes. I used to be a math person. Nice. A long time ago.
Same.
Time ago. Yeah, right. Datadog has derivative functions and aggregate functions, which Prometheus has derivative functions and math and aggregate functions also. What I can't remember, New Relic I think also has derivative functions and aggregate functions. But I think what I was asking is what data is sent across the wire to begin with, and I'm pretty sure New Relic just sends delta values. I don't know how many of the other ones do. It's not that they can't be aggregated on the other side, or that that they can't do derivatives, but I think they just send the delta values, where Prometheus sends the raw counter. That is a difference I know with Prometheus, and I forget what the Open Telemetry SDK does. I think it defers to which backend it is.
Well, will someone please, for a new person like me, differentiate between Datadog and Prometheus?
Do you want me to do it, or do we want to chat?
Sure, anybody, yeah.
So we have out in the wild many companies who specialize in dealing with these time series databases, this time series data, and who provide mechanisms for you to visualize it.
Yeah.
Aggregate, analyze, visualize, store, compress. Datadog is one of them. So that's a company that is, they call it is an observability company. Splunk is, they're an observability provider, you might say. They're going into that observability, all of them are starting
New Relic.
They are. New Relic is another one. Splunk is another one. And some of them have different history. Like a different origin story, sort of. Splunk used to be just about logs.
Okay.
So it was just Splunk would just, and so like even in the monolith days, right? You still had app servers in different data centers and failover behavior with the data centers, and you still got into the place where you wanted to correlate the data collected from all of these different places so you could look at it. Right. And so Splunk was, we will collect all of your log data from wherever it is. And it is software as a service. Splunk, I think, could be installed on-prem somewhere in pick a data center. But the general gist was you would get your logs out of whatever system they came from so that you could analyze them with their tools and stuff. So it would help you do analysis because it would get that data out to somewhere you could look at it. Splunk is now branching out, though. they're starting to collect metrics, and they're starting to collect trace data because OpenTelemetry is making that easier for them to do. So Splunk is no longer just about logs. Datadog was mostly about metrics, but they're starting to do other kinds of data also. I don't know that they're doing logs. That's not really their mojo, and those are really dense, right? So Splunk in the log space kind of has an advantage because they have always been built around storing this expressive, big data. That's their thing. Where some of the other providers that were really more focused on the behavior of metrics are not really built for the volume of data that is logs because they're so big. But like there's a couple of companies that are focused on metrics. Sysdig is another one. They just do metrics. And so how you collect metrics, how you send it, how you visualize it, how you analyze it. And then all of them can help you with alerting and conditions. And they give you various tools to help you. Here's what your trends are. Let me analyze the trends. Let me help you figure out how to set alerts based on thresholds and that kind of thing. A lot of cloud providers also have inbuilt metrics.
That's what I was thinking when they say it's like an elk stack or
Yes, elk stack is a pure open source that's mostly based on logs for log data. That's Elasticsearch and Logstash is your key. Elf is for Logstash, and Kibana, right? And that's Kibana is giving you a dashboard, and it can show you some of the same kinds of graphs that you can get with Prometheus and Grafana, but they're getting it a different way. They're getting it by analyzing the frequency of a message in your logs that has this exception. And you can still set alerts and thresholds from that, but you have to understand you're searching over a much different set of data, which can have a lot of different constraints, right? Because you're doing a text search, it can be more. They are getting, if you use structured data, which at this point, most of the log systems are using structured rather than human readable data. Meaning like you're sending your logs in JSON, rather than like in proper prose sentences.
Yeah. Fuel Schnabel has a lot to say. Datadog has derivative functions and aggregate functions. Everyone loves to hate Datadog at my place, although Fuel Schnabel is on the record for saying they kind of like it. Datadog is software as a service, I suppose. You can send metrics and they provide lots of tools around it. But the drawback is it can be very expensive. I also despise that the Datadog agent is $130.
It's not cheap,
Yeah. Datadog has logs now as well. So Datadog was pure metrics moving into logs. Splunk was pure logs moving into metrics.
Yes, they're all because OpenTelemetry is coming, and that is they have to, in order to compete, they're going to have to start doing all three.
All of it,
Honeycomb is also here. Honeycomb does all three plus their own big event processing thing.
Is Honeycomb another software as a service one? Okay, I'll put it on my list.
It's another one of these providers that says, here, just give me your data and I will help you look at it. Now, the important thing for all of this actually necessarily gets talked about a lot because we have some tendency, we're going to make a Kubernetes cluster. And then everybody's like, well, and we should have observability in our cluster, which is kind of good, except that if your cluster is broken, so is all observability to observe it. The most important key, and the reason all of these other SaaS services are interesting, or even like the inbuilt cloud platform observability solutions are interesting, is because your primary thing is to get your data out of the cluster, out of the system you're trying to observe, so that if the system is belly up, you can still understand what happened, so that you can start to figure out why. And that's more important, you might say. It's more important for, no, it's important across the board. I was going to say, you could say it's more important for logs and traces, which are more verbose anyway. But I think I would still want my canary. I think I would still want my metrics, so that if something is if any of pieces of my system are still emitting metrics, I can see it. There was, if anybody looked, Roblox, I don't know if you remember the great Roblox outage of last year. think it was last year. It was like October. It was like Halloween time. My kids were traumatized because Roblox was down for like 4 days. Oh my God, the world is ending. We don't have Roblox. But they had the best write-up. I mean, it was a little rough on HashiCorp because they totally threw console under the bus. But they had a really good write-up for what happened and why it took them so long to recover. And one of the things is they're using console instead of Kubernetes, which you don't have to know what console is. Just think it's a Kubernetes-ish sort of, right, in your mind map.
Orchestration, yeah.
Exactly. That's what it is, right? It does orchestration stuff. And they had all of their observability stuff also going to console. And so console became their single point of failure. And once it was suffering, they had no way to understand what was happening at all. Like their ability to visualize anything or ask questions or research, like the single point of failure for it like tanked their ability to observe also, or to even historically revisit. So it's like priority number one, numero uno for having an observable system is get your data out somewhere else, anywhere else.
I have a question. So we talked about some SaaS tools, but how does that compare to Prometheus, which I know is open source? Is Prometheus like roll your own for this? Yeah. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, I could totally run Grafana. I could run Prometheus. And this is where I was saying, like, what you often kind of have a mix of both. Right. So in my experience, a team might have, even locally to the cluster, they might have Prometheus scraping endpoints and a Grafana dashboard so that they can keep an eye on whether or not stuff is going well. That doesn't preclude the possibility that those metrics are also going somewhere else. So an SRE team or someone else will be able to look at it if things go wrong. There's no limitation that says you can't have like a local Prometheus that's a little better scoped. Maybe it has more tags available or different tags available. I know, oh gosh, if I remember correctly, one of the early use cases that John Schneider, who is the creator of Micrometer, that he and I used to be talking about, is that an SRE team that he was working with, they provided a library, a node module, could be anything, a library that all of their applications had to use. And that library did set up a Prometheus endpoint specifically for SRE, the site reliability engineering team, that would surface metrics with a predefined, very narrow set of tags. They only wanted a couple things, but they wanted those things across the board. Yeah. And so it set that up and filtered the right thing so that it would go off into the big thing in the sky, and there was no cardinality explosion because they constrained it very much, but they knew they would get the same things from like everybody. So that helped their lives. Nice. But then the developer could add their own endpoint that would have all these richer tags. Give me all of, give me. I want to see all of it but then I can bring it into my own little time series database that I can blow out of the water anytime I want. Nobody else is dependent on it. And so I can get maybe more rich information there. I love that. If I fill my database, I can scrap it and start, I mean, it's our stuff. So we can understand what's going on. And that's a reasonable pattern.
That sounds cool. But you're also relying on someone else to set that up for you, it sounds like.
Maybe. Like in the case of some of the cloud teams that I worked with, the Prometheus data store that was in the cluster that the team used, they managed themselves. They had constraints on how much storage and stuff it would use, and it was very transitory. Like they would blow it up anytime they wanted to. It was mostly like, I just want to be able to look at this detailed information in this way. So here's what we're setting up for our services. Like it was very like, this is our view. We want this view. And then there were other views that were more constrained.
That idea of tightly scoping it so it can't get you in trouble later, and then also thinking of it so casually, like it needs to show us what's now. It doesn't need to hold on to stuff for too long.
Yeah, and I think if you do that, like that can help you a lot. One of the things that when you are using something like Datadog and Honeycomb and the things that let you store stuff a little long term, once you start getting to it, like A/B testing and canary testing, which is how do I make a change to my service and know if it's doing good things or bad things?
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah, so that, and how I enable that, and whether like where those metrics are captured, what the best place is to capture them so that we can get better information. Metrics can be good for that because, again, you can see your 200s or your 500s or your latency, and then if you have tags that know that this one instance is this new version, you don't necessarily have to have the version. You can have the version in the tag. It depends, because that's a cardinality question. Potentially, right? But if you have a unique name, or if you have something that says, well, this is the branch that's active now, is it better or worse? You can start to flag sources of problems.
I have a long list of questions for you. One right now is, I think you touched on this when I was troubleshooting my camera, but what is the Open Telemetry project exactly? How's it different from Prometheus? Yeah.
Okay, so Open Telemetry is an open source project that's part of CNCF. Joni, is it still Sandbox? I think I can't remember if it's still Sandbox or if it's moved and graduated higher. My brain does not remember. The interesting thing about Open Telemetry is the consortium of companies that are involved, right? It started as, let's take Open Tracing and Open Census, both of which are doing similar things. We should just kind of combine these and get a better community out of it. But what I find interesting now about Open Telemetry is all of those SaaS providers are all participating. So that's what I find really interesting, because they all started to realize, I think, we are writing the same agents.
Yeah.
We are writing the same instrumentation code for Java and for Go and for like, why are all 12 of us
duplicating this work?
Same thing. Like, this doesn't make any sense. We're not doing any like proprietary, super cool, unique things here. Like, this is dumb. And so I like, that's, to me, when you started to get that broad cross section of observability providers all contributing, they all have different backends, like their backend, their how they store data, how they analyze data, how they the dashboard making and the query making and the alerting. That's where their differentiation is. It's not on the how data gets there. Their differentiation is all about how you work with the data once it is there. And so watching them all collaborate on, how do you send histogram buckets? And this is like, my brain has Charlie Brown, like exponential histogram buckets or whatever histogram bucket format. I just hear Charlie Brown's parents. Wah, 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 wah. It's really bad. My brain refuses to listen to things. But how, like, so listening to them agree and define semantic conventions and like the protobuf format, where they're all agreeing like how data is transmitted on the wire from the source, the measurement source, through collectors to them is fascinating, right? And to me, the fact that all of them are cooperating on that is what makes it super interesting and sticky. And not likely to implode. It's just too many people cooperating to do good things. And then once the data in this format gets to their backend, then they do whatever they do with it.
That's when they're proprietary.
Exactly.
Unique.
That's where they go crazy. Where did I put my?
So
my other phone in.
Way back when Fuel Schnabel asked about visualization, dashboards, and alerting. So we got the visualization. What do we need to know about dashboards?
So dashboards are good and bad. I love when you listen to Charity Majors who talks about how dashboards are like not the answer to all of your problems, because they will lie to you. And it's because you can make a pretty dashboard show whatever you want it to. And it's not necessarily like, if you just are going for something that looks pretty, you might not be doing valid math. And they can be, so when I've given versions of this, my talk about my Monster Combat application, when I was first creating my graphs, dashboards on my the graphs on my dashboard, I found bugs because it was like, why is this looking this way? I did that wrong. And that part's useful, but but making sure you can get a visualization that is meaningful can be challenging. Because it's just, if you're going for something that tries to visually make sense, it's really easy to do things that don't mathematically or statistically make sense. How you're doing your rates and where things are getting processed. And the hardest part to understand is when you're producing these graphs, you are dealing with highly munged data. Munged, like you've had the original data point, the original measurement, and then by the time it's on the dashboard, it was minimally transformed into a rate. Change over time. So whatever that original measurement was, you already are just looking at a rate. And so then you can average the rate and you can do the distribution of the rate, but you're already dealing with smoothing curves and other approximations, because like most of these visualization tools will do some smoothing around dropped data or missed data. So there's some approximation and stuff that's going on there. So it's like in your head, you have to realize, like, if I do get a big, like like a reading that's outside of bounds, right? I have to realize, like, that's not the exact number necessarily. Like a rate of, it changed this much and it was an outlier by this much, but like that's not what the value necessarily was, because it's been approximated. If data was missing on either side, like it's, you just have to bear in mind, like, you are looking for the patterns, you're not necessarily looking for the raw numbers, because they're gone.
Yeah. So dashboards can lie to you. So you need to make sure the measurements are meaningful and watch out for smoothing and approximations.
Yes.
And Field Schnabel says you should have to have a dashboard driver's license.
Yeah. But it's like it's just like, I've just seen people like the easy mistake to make with percentiles, right? Like if I'm looking, or my standard deviation, like I can make a plot of standard deviations. I can have all of my instances compute standard deviations, and I can plot them all, and I can try to do like nothing in Grafana is going to prevent me from trying to do math with those numbers, but it doesn't make any statistical sense.
That makes it, I love it. And then the third thing that Field Schnabel asked about way back when is alerting.
Yes. So with alerting, most observability providers like Prometheus will do it, or Grafana will do it. So it depends on, like, you can do it at multiple levels. It depends on which one is going to give you like the best, I don't know, whichever one you're the most comfortable with. Theoretically, it should be one that other people in your company are using. You know, if you're going to do alerting, don't go do mathematical sense never stopped any dev before. I agree with that statement. But like there's all kinds of ways to do alerting. The trick usually is trying to, and this again, it depends on how your application works and what your expected behavior is. So some of this is tuning, right? It's like you're going to start having measurements, and then you're going to have to figure out how your application behaves and what's actually important, and then the thresholds within which alerting makes sense. Because like you don't necessarily want an alert every time a 500 error happens, because maybe that happens all the time. I mean, I can't imagine why, but like that would be a good plan. But I could foresee that maybe that's just not an issue, or it's not a big issue. So you don't want to alert people to the point where they stop paying attention, because that's what will happen. Alert exhaustion, right? And they won't answer the page anymore because it's just that thing. You don't want to do that. So you start to get to a thing where you're going to alert me if it happens more than X time within this window. If it happens 6 times within 5 minutes, okay, then something's wrong. It's not the one time. It's like if it happens more than once, if it happens more than twice, if it happens X number of times. And you start doing that. But that, again, is just practice and tooling or tuning, right? Based on what you actually need to do. And just be cognizant of alert exhaustion.
There were a couple alerts.
There were a couple exactly. And if the alert goes off, if the alert goes off too often, maybe you're not measuring the right thing. Maybe maybe this is, you're just, you're not on the right condition, or you just do need to remove it because it's not actually telling you something useful. There's something else you should be looking at to get to the condition that you want. Oh, there's another thing that's related, but not exactly. That has to do with, do I want to go into that now? I don't really think it's, so like all of this stuff, adding metrics and adding tracing, and adding logs, adding health checks, like none of this is free. So it does impose some cost, some performance cost over time. And there is a performance penalty too for over, like, not so much like alerting happens over on the server side, but you can cause problems by like overdoing your health checks. Like, let me have all of my health checks for all of my instances ping the database, because if like that's not how you build a resilient system. That just popped into my head, but it's not really related to metrics.
Metrics aren't free.
Like, metrics are not free. That's right. Yeah, no, they're not free. So how much you turn on, like, it depends on.
It's a little egg of wisdom.
Yeah.
So, yeah, how is the chat feeling? Do you have any questions around metrics? Y'all have been wonderful today. I guess we've kind of already summarized this much of it. We talked about how things used to be measured and how that's very much different now when we have to do metrics for distributed applications. So we're going to want to use some tools like Prometheus and OpenTelemetry. And adding labels, for instance.
To answer your question, right? So OpenTelemetry is like, it has many parts to the system. So OpenTelemetry is trying to be a more general purpose system of pieces that help you collect telemetry data. So they have agents and things that actually help you instrument your applications. So I mean, like, collect in the actually measure stuff. And then they have collectors, which aren't collectors. They're like they're transmitters, right? It's like, let me gather the data that has been measured and then forward it on to something else. Those are like the collectors. And then there's a bunch of, like, all of the different backends are kind of separate in that sense. Prometheus would be one of the potential targets, right? Prometheus understands time series data. It understands how to process time series data. Prometheus does not do logs.
Okay. So OpenTelemetry collects the data. Prometheus helps process the data.
Yeah, like Prometheus has a client that you can use in your application to also, like, do the instrumentation, gather the measurement for the HTTP request duration. OpenTelemetry has agents and libraries that help you instrument that data. Micrometer is like that instrumentation layer that's close to the application. There are libraries for many of these systems for that piece. But then when we talk about Prometheus, there is that piece that's like how I actually instrument my app. But Prometheus is what it does. Is it is metrics. It's collecting metrics, storing it in time series data, and giving you tools and APIs and methods, or mechanisms to analyze that time series data. And then Grafana can work with multiple data sources, and Grafana helps you visualize that data.
Okay, so Grafana is also open source, and
Grafana is also open source.
Okay.
So, like, if you talked about Prometheus and Grafana together as a thing where Prometheus will do the storing and the processing of the time series data, and then Grafana provides the visualizations, Datadog does both of those things.
Okay.
Statsd or Sysdig does both of those things. So it fits that piece of the puzzle.
Excellent. I want to go to chat, has some things. That reminded me of my time at Ericsson. Operators don't want to turn on logging because when you do, the performance can change and crash the base station. So I think be mindful of performance cost, our egg of wisdom.
Yeah.
Phil Schnabel agrees.
Everybody's been super nice. I totally agree.
It's been a wonderful chat today. Code with Sean says action is always nice. So I think maybe by that you mean leaving here with an action to take to improve Is that what we mean?
Or making sure that what you're collecting is actionable data.
Oh,
like, don't just collect stuff that means nothing, because it costs. It's expensive. So if you're like, don't take things because they make a pretty graph. Like, if it's not going to tell you something that would be useful. Oh, action is a Twitch thing too.
Oh.
I didn't type that. I don't know what that means. But oh no, I know what he meant. He meant /me. Yeah, he just said that. It was an IRC thing. That's funny. But it was a useful thought also. So
yeah,
gave me a handle, which is just like, that can be a useful filter to determine what to measure, right? If it's not going to give you something that would help you choose or help you decide something needs to change, then don't do it just because it's pretty.
Joni said during his with observability, you want to basically capture every meaningful, I guess we're using the word meaningful, output that you possibly can, because you don't know what you're going to want to know about later.
That's the observability story as opposed to the metric story, right? So if you think about, and this is also something Charity Majors from Honeycomb, they will talk about all the time, which is if you don't have that rich data and something goes wrong, you don't have anything to work with. But when we're talking about that, we're going to places that understand how to handle volumes, extensive volumes of data, which is not necessarily what you want for metrics. Right? Metrics is your canary in the coal mine. It's not your rich data lake of stuff that I can hyperanalyze to figure out what's going on with some detailed stuff. Right? So it's like, if I'm going to have a dashboard for it, if I'm going to have an alert for it, it should be meaningful. Otherwise, why do I want my eyeballs looking at that thing?
Yeah, definitely. If you're alerting on it, 100%. Yeah. And Joni does qualify meaningful outputs when he talked about observability. He didn't say everything.
Well, but that's what's interesting is if you listen now, granted, Honeycomb has a product, right? So, but they're not entirely wrong, because what they're trying to say is you don't know what you don't know. And if something happens and you don't have the data, you can't figure it out. Like, there's you've got no breadcrumbs to follow. You don't have enough data to understand. But you should be cognizant of where and when and how you're collecting that data. Metrics, like I said earlier, because you're dealing with so much in the aggregate anyway, if you try to put this stuff in metrics, you will create time series where the data for that time series is so sparse, it's not useful.
Yeah.
So it's like, why do you collect it? It's not, doesn't have enough data points to show you anything or to be, to be useful.
Fuel Stable says, I don't know what WRT means.
With regard to.
Thank you, good. To alerts that go off with no action. I argue then let's remove it. And I'm often opposed that we might miss something. But if we have something that goes off and we don't fix it, then we risk missing other things. I'm inclined to agree with you, Fuel Schnabel, on that.
Yeah. If they go off with no action. I think the question is I would like, if you have an example of that where somebody's paranoid that they're going to miss something, try to get them to be specific. Like, what condition are you worried about? And is this something that we could catch in some other way anyway that would actually be more meaningful? Like, are you just worried that you're going to have a 500 like error that you miss? Is that something that could be done later based on log analysis and has something that everybody looks at every Friday? I don't know. I mean, like, is there some other way to do that doesn't involve an alert that people are going to ignore? I mean, alert exhaustion is a thing.
Yeah, Rick's chiming in. I think it's a conversation and say, what would you like me to do with this information? Like, if you want to keep this information, how can we use it more intelligently than what we're doing now, which is ignoring it and wasting everybody's time? Yeah,
exactly.
Code with Sean has a cheeky comment. There are things I don't know. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I'm right now rewriting about the open source tools because I think these are important. This is an important takeaway. So that's what I'm doing here on the board.
You guys hear any squeaking in the background? My dog has decided that now is the time to have doggy dreams. You can't really see. He's just over there.
Cute.
He's having doggy dreams.
Did you hear my cat in here earlier meowing up the storm? Okay, good. I wasn't sure. Next time I'll pick her up to say hi, but I think we must have been talking about something important where I didn't want to interrupt it.
Oh,
okay.
Rick says he caught the meows, so I must have.
Oh, yeah. Because you were also with me talking about the important thing. Oh no. Findle says dog, unfollow. Findle has a lovely cat, Zelda. Yeah. And wonderful. Oh, we got lots of love for the cats. Man, I should have brought her on. Yeah. Are there any more questions? I'm gonna keep recapping a little bit. I love these tools, so I put them up here. I just wanted to. So these are the open source tools that are used around metrics, and you're also saying that these SaaS tools will use all those open source tools, right?
Many of them do. They have proprietary bits too, but some of them are, or they'll at least understand the data format, or So OpenTelemetry is also open source as a open source project.
Yep. Yes. Cool.
Oh, you have it in there. Yeah, I can read.
I was double checking myself. I didn't mean to be like, yo.
No.
Yeah. I was like, I wrote that right? Okay. So metrics are your baseline, your statistics, your anomaly detectors. And then what should you measure? We didn't get into a specific result here. Instead, we said we can trust our tools like OpenTelemetry and Micrometer and stuff, our backend libraries to do that for us.
For the basics, for the basics that everyone uses, for absolutely sure. Yes. Most of those, and they're safer. You're safer using those. You're less likely to do it wrong if you use those common basic ones. But the other ones, like my monsters, right? Nobody could have done that for me. I had to do it myself because nobody else writes applications that have monsters fight each other, right? That's totally me. And that, I think, in that case, it's like you have to evaluate again, and what we were talking about in terms of like, what should I do with that information? So in my case, I had two purposes. One was I just wanted to understand how this should behave, which is atypical. Most people do not do exploratory applications. I did because I needed to understand combat rules. So I just wanted to know what the baseline was. What's the average number of rounds? What's the average attack damage? Like, I just wanted to see what those averages were. So I collected them so I would be able to paint that picture for myself and improve my understanding. But there were some other things, like while I was writing this combat engine down, right, when I was creating how these monsters would fight, I started to realize I was making choices about how any one monster would choose the other monster to fight. And I was like, oh, this could be interesting. What are good combat strategies? Should we all pile on the one with the most health? Should we all pile on the one with the least health? Should we just pick at random? So I did have in my metrics, I started to say, well, I've got 4 choices for how to fight. I will record which one I picked. And so then I could start looking at, does it make a difference if I pick one strategy over another strategy?
So you learn the best strategy and then use that to kick your son's butt every time you play together.
Well, no, because I was the dungeon master, so I was just, I was just running all the monsters. But I wanted to understand how combat, like what I should expect, how I should expect combat to go, right? Because I didn't want to be clueless.
Okay, so that will help you choose what to measure. Like what do you want to know? Just ask yourself.
Yeah. Just that, like what things are important to how my application functions. What do I need to know that I'm doing the right thing? Now, am I successful in retrieving? Like Netflix always used to talk about how they would fetch their. Okay, like give me a second. Let me see if I can remember how this example went, because it was a good example. So they used to talk about, when they were talking about Hystrix and they were talking about like fallback failover cases, stopgap kind of things, how you fail gracefully, right? So like they would, one of their services was like how I show you your library or like the movies to choose from. I'm going to show you a recommended, it's the recommended set. I'm going to show you like movies are recommended. Okay. Let's say that goes well. Okay, I can count. That went well. Yay. Okay. That failed. I can count that failure, and I can say, but I was able to get this other cache and then send it back, because they have like a tiered caching. It's like the cache for you the cache for people like you, the cache for people near you, I don't know. Random set. And so I can count how many times those 4 cases are happening.
Okay.
For example, right? I can see, oh, I'm having to fail over to this other cache an awful lot. What is going on? Or I am never getting to this cache. Why are we even maintaining it? It's not getting used at all. I could just get rid of that and it would be great, and that's less for me to maintain. So you can start to count that kind of stuff that is meaningful to how your service is behaving and making sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. That's what I mean. Like, I can't give you a guideline in that. It's up to what your service is doing.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And then front-end metrics, we talked about Google Analytics. Is that the main way to do front-end metrics?
That's probably the most common one for people that are hobbyists that do it for free.
But everything else we've been talking about with our tooling has been about back-end stuff, right?
Yes. Yeah. So the front-end stuff, does matter. It does give you,
it's more about this, like how it's used. Yeah.
Yeah. And that tends to be like, that's the front end metrics are usually where you look more at the user demographics and other things. Like they're collecting and allowing you to aggregate over different kinds of things. And there are things that I don't know that I would want to replicate in the back end, per service. You know, depending on the service, those numbers aren't even relevant anymore. And yes, Fuel Schnabel, Google Analytics does have legal issues in Europe, which is why I was looking at other things. I just haven't chased that thread lately. But that's why I had started to look at it. And I know at least one of them, there was at least one like SaaS service that was front end metrics to like a collector that they have, which then would forward to whatever back end thing that you have, because people change their back ends all the time.
So it's, to continue summarizing, we talked about where metrics sits within the observability, the 3 pillars that you don't like and Joni doesn't like, but here they are. Because it doesn't include health checks, or there's like more things.
It's just a lot of people are trying to talk about it more holistically. If you just talk about one piece, then people think it's more the whole picture, right? It's not like they are completely distinct. The threads and the lines blur in terms of what information you can get from where.
The metrics are the actual measurements over time. The logs are the diary of the application. Every thought, every feeling. The traces connect the context between the metrics and the logs, or they show you the spaces in between.
Yes.
And then we talked about visualization, dashboards, and alerting. So in visualization, the x-axis is always time, and we're interested in a rates of change, not necessarily the actual data points. More
correct. That's the hardest part to understand, is that your relationship with the originally collected data is gone. As soon as you have 2 instances of a service, even as soon as you are looking at HTTP requests for 2 instances of a service, boom, you're like already rates of change aggregated across 2 things. Your original data points are not there anymore.
So be careful about your y-axis. Be thoughtful and mindful about what you're choosing.
Yes. And understand. Just real. It's like a conscious memory, a conscious thing in your head. Like you are dealing with aggregated data, which is really good, because that's what you want. You want the trends, right? You just have to remember, like, these are not the actual data points.
Yes. And we talked about tools. I love talking about the tools. And then for dashboards, they can lie to you. Again, make sure your measurements are meaningful, and watch out. Your dashboard tool will be doing smoothing and approximations.
Exactly. And those 2 are related. The visualization and the dashboards are related, but yes.
Yes, that makes sense. And then alerting, you're going to want to watch your application and tune first before you set for alerts. So that way you're going to learn the thresholds in which alerting makes sense. And then don't over alert. We'll say alert exhaustion is real.
Yes, alert exhaustion is real.
And then one big, 2 nuggets of advice. Metrics aren't free, so be mindful of performance costs, the egg says. And then it's also wise to get your observability data outside of the cluster. So if your cluster goes down, you have some outside source to figure out what happened.
What happened?
Yeah. Yes. So is there any more questions from the chat or anything we missed, Erin, that you feel like we need to? I'm out of space.
I don't know.
But I'll make
I'm
some.
like,
I'll find something.
Did we squish a lot on here?
I'll start writing over my face if I have to, if it's important enough.
Joni, did we miss anything? I kept saying, you kept saying Erin's going to talk about this. So I'm hoping I talked about all the things.
Yes. But yeah, this has been really lovely. Oh, I heard a joke last time I was at a conference at KubeCon, actually. What do you call two women at a tech conference?
Oh, no, I don't know.
Friends.
Yay! That's true.
Yeah,
that's true.
We got great session. Thank you, Lisa, for coming. I really appreciate it. Good laughs too. Yes. And I think it's time to say goodbye. So this has been an absolutely perfect way to spend a Thursday morning, and I appreciate y'all. See you next time. Bye.